Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who. What was intended as an earnest declaration of heroic defiance against the tyrants of Twitter by the unjustly censored Dr. Jordan B. Peterson ended up becoming one of the most memed statements on the internet. Why? Well, apart from the blatant grammar error and the sheer impotence of threatening a company which is basically immune to pressure from mere mortals like Jordan Peterson, the statement was far too serious for people to take it seriously. For the past several years now, we've seen a shift towards irony and humor as the main mechanisms of political communication. Far from being the realm of youths alone, memes and mockery have become big tools of mainstream politicians. While sincerity still has its place, that place is shrinking. Throughout this video, we'll be exploring the emergence of mockery as a massive tool of political debate. We'll see where it's leading us to, and then we'll close out. If any of this sounds interesting to you, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button for notifications on new videos, consider signing up for YouTube membership, back me on Patreon, or buying merch. All of this really helps the channel. And a quick shout out to my backers on Patreon, including Sir Florida Man and Boomer. There's no doubt that credit for the widespread adoption of snarky, unserious humor in modern politics goes to Jon Stewart, which is odd because he's Jewish and his tools are now being used by internet Nazis. Comedians have talked about politics before, but he was really the first one to actually make serious points buried beneath the jokes. The first to realize that they could enhance, rather than detract from, the serious points. How does this happen? Well, it's a formula that was perfected with John Oliver's show. You point out an absurd situation, you make a silly joke that everyone can laugh at, and then you pivot to something with a serious nature and you get all serious about it. Now, humor isn't something we process with the conscious mind, it's something we process with the subconscious mind, which is far more vulnerable to suggestion and less critical of information. When we get into a comedic context, we effectively turn our thinking brain off, which is the perfect time to convince you of something. You'll be far less resisting. This is political hypnosis, in effect. The effectiveness of this approach can't be understated. It was no doubt key to the rebellion against the Bush era and the installment of Obama. Hosts like Stewart and Colbert put their audience to sleep with jokes about the politicians in order to get their more serious message across. For more than a decade, this rhetorical strategy gave the left basically 100% solid cultural control, especially among the youth, and kept the Republicans as the cringe party of the boomers. Two things helped change this, and the first was the online right, which at about 2013 or so emerged as a band of political radicals dominated and led by neo-Nazis, which 90% of the new quote-unquote radical right is intellectually and culturally descended from, even though they'll never admit it. What's interesting about them is that they started off 100% earnest, with epic montages set to dramatic soundtracks and racist infographics that gave statistic after statistic with MLA-formatted citations. It was basically this, but in reverse, a far cry from stuff you see nowadays like Stone Toss. It was only after an event called the Cuckening, which I am not going to get into, that they really learned how to take themselves less seriously. And then the second thing that helped the right learn how to be humorous was Donald Trump. People say that he defined the Republican Party after him by virtue of being populist and anti-immigrant and how have you, but his success really came from his humor and his ability to ridicule, and the right managed to finally adopt this rhetorical tool from him. So that's where we're at in 2022. Humor-based hypnotism has proliferated through the political landscape like nuclear weapons among great powers during the late 20th century. Ever since about 2017 or so, the metaphorical hydrogen bomb of this arms race has taken its place alongside humor. Hatred. Once the conscious mind is shut down and opinions are implanted, a political persuader installs a sort of firewall against anyone doing something similar in the future, so that they can keep their victim under their control. That firewall is hatred, a neurotic hatred against anyone who disagrees. The other side is all a bunch of racist fascists, or they're all a bunch of communist groomers. With this defense in place, the subconscious mind makes all the decisions and evaluations according to the very simple my team good, enemy bad filter. Any logic-based arguments are completely ineffective due to the stranglehold it has on the reasoning critical conscious mind. This also helps cover up the cognitive dissonance which comes from having conflicting beliefs, which anyone who adheres totally to a political dogma eventually does. So, hypnotic-induced allegiances maintained by hatred. One could be forgiven for wondering whether we're talking about political parties or cults. It appears we've discovered something of a fundamental flaw in the human psyche, or an overpowered exploit if you prefer. It doesn't seem that there's any way to put this genie back in the bottle either, so what's the solution? Is there a solution? I've been thinking about this for a while, which is a part of why this video is so late. We could fall back on the whole Neuralink thing and say humanity is a thing to be overcome, but that's still decades away from large-scale adoption. Could humanity evolve to be more hypnosis resistant? You definitely see various people for whom the humor and vitriol just isn't enough to make them toe any line, like how that TYT lady rebelled against the established wisdom on crime on the left. One possible outcome that I've been thinking of is that ideologies and dogmas will eventually become so far removed from what's readily observable that the cognitive dissonance will become too much for people to bear, and the psyche of both left and right will snap, so to speak, resulting in a Slav-tier cynicism and distrust of all public institutions. Of course, having seen the corruption in the civil institutions of those nations, that might not be such a desirable outcome either. And this might take a long time. It took 19th, 20th, and some of the 21st century for this to happen in the sphere of religion. The equivalent process in the sphere of politics might take just as long. Or perhaps the status quo will stabilize and we'll become a race of herd animals led by a few autists who are immune to all this. Either way, the sincerity and heartfelt earnestness that men like Peterson hearken to is gone for good. And those are just the facts. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button for notifications on new videos, consider signing up for YouTube membership, back me on Patreon, or buy merch. All of this really helps the channel. Goodbye!